Hello, and welcome to the Kink Perspective. My name's Chris. I'm a psychotherapist and consultant. Today, on this episode, it's going to be kind of a year in review. It's kind of hard to believe that I've been doing the Kink Perspective now for about the last 10 months since I launched it earlier in 2022. And I'm slowly wrapping up the year as we head into 2023. And really want to kind of sit back and reflect a little bit on this episode about all the things that I've talked about in the past, what's coming up for the future, what I've kind of learned and we've taken away from all of the different things that in the psychological understanding of where we've come from and to where we're going. Fortunately, I've had enough time to sit and learn with a lot of different information about the lifestyle, different kinks, different things we do, different scenes, talking about scent, all of these things that encompass the lifestyle in a greater whole. It has allowed me a platform to really start to understand on a deeper level, like some other psychologists do, about BDSM. Why do we do it? Why we're drawn to it? What about it kind of really pulls us in? How do we differentiate the things that are beneficial to us, differentiating the things that we don't necessarily understand aren't beneficial to us? Demystifying some of the myths that sit around BDSM, and so much more. When I look back through a lot of these episodes, when I look back and think about having the opportunity to really reflect on all of these things, principles, mindfulness, it has gone for me, not only has aided me in learning more about the lifestyle and about certain kinks, and I'll get into that in some of the interviews here in a moment, but it's really enabled me a platform to, with all of you along the way, talking about the other things that are really important. Some of my more memorable things that I've had a chance to discuss and reflect on really came at a moment when I'm looking at these things that, like when I did my first episode on principles, and I talked about those core beliefs, and I kind of came at it with this is where we look at the lifestyle. This is kind of a little bit of who I am and the things that I believe in within the lifestyle. So, for example, the more high protocol, the old guard, which, it's how I was trained. I look at some of the other things that resonated with people when I look at psychology behind the myths, sadism and sexual sadism disorder. I look at where psychology still is today and how it impacts the law and the things that I want to talk about in the future. And the one thing I want to look at with this past year, with learning so much, is I still look at the struggle that so many of us in the lifestyle, regardless of who you are and what you do, whether you're an exhibitionist or in the DDLG community, or you're part of the lactation crowd or a sadist, whatever tickles your fancy, that we're still under the thumb of a society that doesn't understand why we like what we like and why we do what we do. More we're a part of it. Why we're drawn to having someone urinate on us or having someone beat us with colorful bruises. And the laws don't look at it that way. The general society, which, the vast majority, which outweigh the minority that are involved in this lifestyle, don't necessarily agree with all of our choices. But in that understanding, it gives us an opportunity to break down and talk about the differences of why. So when somebody asks me, why do I like being a dominant? Why do I like being a sadist? Why do I enjoy that control? And what about that power? These are the things that I've had the ability to talk about here. And this also has given any of you who've listened from all over the world, which I definitely want to say thank you for that. It's giving you the opportunity to expand your vocabulary, to understand yourself on a different level, to understand that, no, there's nothing wrong with us. Yes, we sit outside the norm, But if the norm in psychology has never been it's one solid way that we all operate. One thing when I'm talking to my clients and they always talk about, well, I'm not normal, I always ask them, well, what is the definition of normal? Now, there are general principles and general guidelines and rules that we all follow in society and laws that we agree to, and that's fine. We can, for the most part, all work with inside of those parameters. But when it comes to the normality of sexual exploration, sexual freedom, sexual enlightenment, that's where we begin to differ. And we tend to hide that true self from others. We tend to redact it. We tend to, we go out, we find a boyfriend or girlfriend or some significant other, and we think that straight missionary is going to be all it is. But then all of a sudden we discover, a vast majority of people watch pornography, and through porn or reading books, they discover, hey, that sounds really enticing. I'd love you to take your water bottle and shove it in my mouth while you're fingering my anal cavity. Trying not to be overly graphic here at the end of the year, so bear with me as much as some of you may chuckle and I wanted to say something else. But the reality is that we start discovering these things along the way. We find out that there's a lot more pleasure for us when we're driving in our cars and with our significant others, and we're commanding them to do something, or we are tying them to a bed, and we really encompass this, or we're taking those relationships, those intimate relationships, and really form bonds of trust that go much deeper in some senses than the vanilla world. Vanilla people, or the vanilla lifestyle, or and it's not a stigma, and I'm not trying to say it's wrong or anything, because a lot of people are happy doing it. There is a lot that they can learn from BDSM. They can learn about consent and openness, and having communications that surround their sexuality. There are a lot of people that could benefit from learning some of the things that we know or experience here, not because they need to be a kinkster or just a weekend player or even get involved in a lifestyle, because this lifestyle, and one thing I've consistently talked about over these last 10 months, for the most part, is effort and work and how much we have to commit to it. And for the most part, there's not a lot of people who are living it 24/7, and I don't have the time. I have a full-time practice, and I produce podcasts, and I write up papers, and I have clients, and I've got family commitments and all of these things. So I don't do it 24/7. But when I interact with my submissive and we're in that space, it's just her and I. That's it. And there's nothing else. And it's in that time. And it's sacred. And people don't it's hard for some people to grasp this. Why do you want to beat her? Why does she like being beaten? Right? Or for the male submissives that are out there, well, why would any male want to be put in chastity or have a cigarette be put out on his penis? Well, because they enjoy it. They enjoy that aspect and the release of control. And it's hard to understand when we look at all of these things that we've talked about, or I've talked about this year, and go, here's all this information. We are normal, and there's nothing wrong with all of that. I look back at some of these other things that I've talked about, operant conditioning, and one conversation I so thoroughly enjoy, or I've had 3 interviews this year. I intended on having more. I didn't get around to it. There was a couple of quote-unquote celebrities I wanted to get to, because it wasn't so much of their status, but I wanted to understand more of who they were and how they operated, some within the poly lifestyle, some not. I had a wonderful conversation. If you hadn't had a chance to listen to it early on, I had a conversation with Luna Lux and Sovereign Kane, 2 people in a dominant relationship that also share a person between them. And to understand how that dynamic works, and to allow people inside of their lives, it allows anybody who listens, or those who are in the lifestyle and are considering a move like this, a deeper understanding of what works and goes on inside of those types of relationships. A couple of weeks ago, about a week ago, I had a great conversation kind of ending to or heading towards the end of the year on lactation and what went into that fetish and why it was, why we do what we do, and the commitment and body modification. And that conversation was with Brooke, and that was wonderful. And it brought another part of the lifestyle to us. It allows people to understand, for those who are maybe involved in relationships where they don't necessarily want to separate, but maybe they're heading towards an open marriage or an open relationship between the two, to get and grasp from somebody else's perspective a deeper understanding of how that just works. Not just the fetish itself, because if you can look past that discussion, you can see the devotion and care it takes to go and get involved in something else. Another really interesting and fun conversation I had was with a friend of mine, Scorpio. And we talked about his struggles with the lifestyle as far as becoming, learning the ropes as a new dominant and what it's like to have the public's attention. And that takes a lot because, there's a lot of pride and reflection, or not a lot of pride there, and a lot of reflection on knowing what he wants and what he doesn't want. All of these things where these people have allowed themselves to open up over this year, or the other things that I've talked about, infidelity or relationships as a whole, or sometimes even hitting the political matrix as much as I can, has given me a lot more insight into the lifestyle, because it's forced me in my role, not only as a dominant, but as a therapist, to really look and find if the work has been done there. One question that comes up a lot that I think I've touched base on here and there, but I want to make definitively clear: why can't we ever look at BDSM as a treatment? Does BDSM also, the follow-up question I usually get is, does BDSM have any therapeutic benefits? And I wrote about this not too long ago, and I have it up on my website. But BDSM ultimately comes down to, it will never, ever be considered a therapeutic treatment. It won't change. And one of the reasons why is that when all of us go out and get our licensure, that we have certain ethical standards we have to abide by. Now, one of those barriers slowly got broken. There was a female psychologist whose name escapes me, but she created what's called touch therapy. So throughout her sessions with her clients, she might give them a hug or anything that is obviously consented by, but it's over the clothing and it's not in anywhere sexually suggestive, right? It's not touching below the waist, usually not above the knee, but they're reaffirming touches, and it's proven to have beneficial qualities. And why am I mentioning that? Because when I look at these questions that I get in sparse from people, the reality is that putting somebody on a table and binding them to it and tying them and then talking to them about their mother while I'm beating them would violate every oath and ethics that I've sworn to uphold. So it is a fine line. And there are people that are trying to work on changing that. And who knows, maybe in the future we won't have all of the things that we face. But it is a boundary of, where does consent lie? Can you really consent to being beaten, and all of these other things? When I look at all of the things I've had the opportunity to share with you over the years, or over this past year, and so many months, I've really been fortunate to use my platform to bring that different level, where I know other podcasts are out there, they're talking about what it's like to be a submissive, and the submissive's role, and this is NADU position for this week, and here's the whole position for that week, and there's nothing wrong with that. I wanted this to be different, and you all have allowed me to bring something here to be different, and that means a lot to me, because without listeners, without people wanting to know or understand or listen to what I have to say, that wouldn't happen. I'd have 5 listens instead of a few thousand that I have now, or downloads. For the most part, and I've said this recently, I'm trying to keep everything that I do free, because I believe this is the information that the community needs to feel informed, to grow, and to bring a deeper understanding to the things we like. So now, as I'm getting ready, as most of us are, screaming towards 2023 in a few days, I'm looking forward to it. Renewed optimism and hope that the world is going to move into better places. I'm looking at doing more interviews. I would like to get into, the response has been with a few of my polls, should I do more interviews? And I'm going to. Maybe try to get to one a month or one every couple of weeks and talk about different kings. And beware if you're one person listening, like I did with most recently and like I've done with Scorpio, I want to challenge and I want to push back. And I'm not doing this to be offensive, but we're doing this so we can understand. So we can understand the emotional process behind what we do, and so we can challenge it. So we can understand that when we like being a masochist isn't the same for everybody. There are some that are emotional masochists or some that are just physical masochists, and how those differ. There are those that believe in different things than we do. Some that like to get into the objectification fetish, or that love to be caged, and why. And all of those types of episodes are coming, I promise. In the new year, I'm going to really try to branch out and get into some deeper, I think, kinks and fetishes that are out there that aren't as mainstream, which is why, like when I did lactation, it was interesting because it's not mainstream, and I didn't know much about it, and I've learned so much, not only just about the body modification part, but the emotional components that went along with it, the neuroscience behind it, which not only benefited our community, but it benefits me when as a therapist, I get to grow. And I get to use that understanding so when people are facing an issue, I can talk to them about it. One question I've received quite a few times was, I've seemed to kind of neglect talking about in these past 10 months, or give or take, why have I never discussed poly or polyamory or ethical non-monogamy or anything of the like? Or I haven't even touched base on consensual, non-consensual. There are a couple of topics that are firebrand topics. They're hard to do. My work centers around being a trauma therapist, so I work with people in trauma. So dealing with CNC and talking about it on my show, I'm not sure necessarily how I feel about it, which is interesting. But I also have to think of people that listen to what I have to say, or come here looking for that advice, and then talking and spending all that time, and whether I find something about it out I like or I agree with as far as the psychology behind, I don't want that to hurt someone else or cause them displeasure, because that's not what this is made about. But then on the other side, it's also good to know the information. So we'll see. The bigger question is, why Chris, why haven't you done poly yet? Why didn't you have a big poly talk on? Well, there was a couple of people I wanted to talk to about their poly, about their feelings on the lifestyle and how they conduct themselves within their dynamics, their polycules, and everything along those lines. It's hard for me because I have my feelings on polyamory. So I'm kind of looking at that discussion as a give and take, because why I haven't even written too much about it is because poly's not for everybody. And poly's also not, I think, the one thing that is to constantly be said, it's not the utopia that it's constantly, I think a lot of people make it out to be, or maybe not so much make out to be, but believe poly to be. That it's some final end-all, be-all that's going to solve all of our problems. Now it's like anything else. Poly is for people and it works for certain people. But again, it's a subject I haven't touched base on, and I think that in the future episodes when I'm looking at these types of things, bigger discussions around something like polyamory might be probably a 2 episode deal, so I can give it its just due, because I don't want to just hammer away on something I don't agree with. I want to also look. I want to look at both sides. I want to look at what are some of the benefits besides the negatives, so we can understand when we're making these informed decisions and informed choices that we know we have some information, or we have more information than we knew, or at least we've gained some information that we didn't know, and we're allowed to make a better informed choice and keep moving forward. I know 2022 has been an interesting year. I've seen a lot of discontent on social media, to the point where I have to put up warnings. Please don't, if you're not going to basically have anything nice to say. I'm all for civil discourse. I'm all for it even on my podcast. But we've also wrapped ourselves so much around this world that we are in a position of, and it doesn't matter what side you're really sitting on, is I'm right and you're wrong. And we've gone to an us versus them mentality. Well, in this lifestyle, the one great thing is we've always abided by is what you're into. Your kink isn't my kink. But that's even that has seemed to dilute over this past year. More we're starting to see more people kind of kink shame or attack others, gatekeep. I'm guilty of that too. There are some things I gatekeep because they're practices that we've been doing for a long time. And there's reasons why we don't update them. There's also reasons why people go back underground. And that's another thing I'll probably look at in the coming year. I want to make sure that they keep doing the show the way I want to do the show. The other aspect I've been asked about is, am I going to get on YouTube? I don't have the time to produce a YouTube channel. I do currently have one under the same name. There was nothing there because for a lot of you, whether you know or don't know, initially this was going to start out. I had vigorously looked a little over a year ago, vigorously looked for a female therapist. And I wanted this show to really be a kind of a counterpoint with a male and female perspective on the kink world. How BDSM drives us. And I was fortunate enough, I'd met somebody and we started talking, and it was really going to go ahead. And I wrote about that earlier in this year. And unfortunately, life happens. But we also were going to host a YouTube channel. I don't have the ability or the time to really do that. Learning how to do audio editing and all of the things I'm still learning. Trying to get the show to be better so the audio is clearer and there's less noise in the background with unfortunately cars going by and buses and kids screaming on occasion or birds chirping. I don't have the time to do a channel, at least not now. Maybe in the future. It'd be interesting. Maybe when I get to the point that I'm just working out of a new location, I can produce one, but we'll see. That one's a definite back burner. I just don't know if like I said, I really want to host a video channel and take all of this live, but we'll see. Maybe we'll get to a format where that's like once a month, and I'll put up a video with really interesting guests that I can, bring in, and we can go more, maybe get into the point where I'm fantasize about possibly bringing in people doing demonstrations and explaining more. So that avenue is there. But I promise you that I'm still going to be bringing in the psychological side, because that's the part that is beneficial. So, slowly wanting to wind this down as 2023 or 2022 comes to an end. I want to wish you all a happy holidays. I want to wish you a big thank you from me for taking this journey with me for this past year, for being on this ride of, 45 episodes and about 20 hours more of me talking and rambling into a microphone about different subjects or different passion projects, or talking about a friend of mine or a client of mine from the States and their love story. All of these different things have touched all of has touched my life, and allowed me this space to share it with you all. So for 2023, like I said, I'll be bringing more shows through. I am looking at potentially changing the release days of the week, possibly releasing on weekends. New schedule, new jobs, new hope, new adventures, right? Again, as which is why Brooke reached out to me not too long ago. I think it's about a month ago now at this point when she reached out. If you have something you want to talk about, if there is something a little bit more niche and you're a little nervous wanting to talk about it, this is the place for you. Because I promise you, just like she did when she brought that to my attention and I wrote a big post, so many people responded. There was so much support for her wanting to talk. For as nervous as she thought she was, and she did wonderful, it really allowed others their footing to go, you know what, I like this too. Thank you for talking about it. I can be more open about it. And that's what this is about. So if there's something you'd like to really get into and have a discussion about, I have thought about some of the darker fetishes, kind of like, well, I don't know if it's dark, but more obscure fetishes like Roman showers, if you're familiar with that. That is definitely not for the faint of heart, but I believe there is some room psychologically to talk about that fetish. There are some other off the wall things I'd love to get into, some discussions about cages. When the poly discussion is going to happen, I don't know, but it'll definitely happen in 2023 with or without somebody. I prefer doing it with somebody so I can get their perspective and be a little bit more challenging. But I'm going to bring this to a close, and like I said, I want to say thank you. I wish you all happy holidays. I wish you a very safe and fun new year, no matter what you're doing. And I look forward to the next season. So I'll start season 2 in 2023. I will probably take the next week or two off because I've got to get my client list and other things have more priority than this. And then I will kick off the season 2 of the King Perspective mid to late January. And we will go from there. So, as I always say at the end here, until next time, everybody, be safe and stay kinky.